Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Kirkland signature premium fabric softener sheets of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka I've just got a feeling it's going to be a Sword Boy summer.
Hell yeah. Well, you know it's Sword Boy all the time over here, so I'm ready. And of course, I am the black metal guy, aka limited edition Kekht Arakh hoodie by Supreme.
That's gonna happen, probably.
I know it's gonna happen, and we'll get into that with our first review.
Definitely. So, all right. So, real quick, not a lot going on in the Terminus co-prosperity sphere, but there was one thing that I wanted to bring to the table. So, occasionally when I am looking for records to cover, I'll stumble across something that is cool, but for some reason just not available digitally. I guess it's people trying to pretend it's still, Norway 92, and that cult value is still a thing. But in this case, I actually stumbled across a pretty cool Californian black metal band called Cult of Odium. They put out an EP recently called Legions of Hate. That's OV, so it's real black metal like that. And I listened to the advanced track, and I really liked it a lot, but alas, it is only available as a hard copy, and that's just a little too much turnaround time for us here on the show. But, I wanted to play a little bit of that initial promo track. This is one called Virus, so let's just listen to the first couple minutes of that. Yeah, so probably not what you would expect, given the cover art of this stuff.
Not at all. So the cover, for those who are listening rather than looking, not that we have a fancy visual presentation at all, but for those who are just listening, is like just a wolf with a pentagram on its forehead. Title is Legions of Hate with a V, and on the inner sort of CD art, we've got it's art by the guy who does the Machine Gun Sex Goats, and it's a heap of lambs with a bunch of the Machine Gun Sex Goats on top of it, and they have all got their spiked bracelet, their spiked armbands, and they're holding goat heads and shit. So by that, you would expect either you would expect war metal, and I would guess, judging by wolf with a pentagram on his forehead, I judge by like more Marduk-y type war metal. But that's not what that was at all.
No, not at all. I guess it's a little bit hard to articulate. It's kind of like listening to it again, it's sort of like almost like 2000s symphonic black metal, but with all the symphonic stuff stripped out. You know, it's like maybe like limbonic art with the eccentric kind of electronic stuff removed.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
You played this for me the other day, and I think we're sort of starting to. I think we're figuring it out, because what I was thinking is, okay, I still think this sounds like Kaltatod. And related to that, also maybe later Lunar Aurora.
Yeah, I can see that.
Also, just kind of on the brain, because Arcane Archivist, great Instagram page, posted a Lunar Aurora tribute yesterday. But interestingly, he was talking about the first couple Lunar Aurora records, especially, whereas I feel like I knew their later ones. But for the young ones, Lunar Aurora was one of the first bands where the word atmospheric black metal was used to mean almost exactly the opposite of what it means today.
Definitely.
Which was sort of like music that has some sort of melodic quality and is sort of repetitive and atmospheric and immersive and is black metal. Right? Whereas
versus
music,
now where it's like
melodic,
summoning.
Yeah. Or I mean that's charitable, right? You know, the same three tinkly sounding notes held over and over again, right? It's definitely, and those bands also do sound kind of, you can hear how they'd be related to something like Limbonic art. So basically it sounds like kind of lushly melodic black metal before the various strains of things that define quote-unquote melodic or atmospheric black metal today emerged. Like pre-2010, what very melodic stuff sounded like pre-2010 when it was closer to the rest of black metal. Also structurally different, right? We got like 45 seconds of repetition on that 2-note riff, which I liked.
Oh yeah, definitely. The production's doing some of the lifting. I kind of like I'm assuming that's a drum machine. I kind of like the more mechanical feel of it. It is a throwback to cool, sort of not super prominent stuff that was going on in the 2000s.
Yeah, we would like to hear more from this band for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So if the guys from Cult of Odium are listening, hey, send us the MP3s for this. All right, or I can give you one of our addresses and you can send us the CD or something. But come on, man, just put your shit on Bandcamp. All right, it's okay. We know we all want to hear more of it. So before we get to our rundown for today, standard housekeeping. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow me, the Death Metal Guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, or you can follow the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. Furthermore, if you're really interested, you can help us out by subscribing to us on Patreon or Subscribestar. That would be a great option right now, because without getting into too many details, I recently had to leave my job as part of a very complex legal situation that is still unfolding right now, and I say that without a trace of irony. So, any added income...
It's their fault, not his.
Yes, I didn't do anything wrong. I am totally clean on this, but a lot of people did a lot of questionable things. So for the time being, I'm out of work. So if you want to contribute to the war effort of allowing me to continue buying liquor and slam shirts, you can do that on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to our Terminus Prime bonus episodes, and $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server where our fans create wonderful memes about us, and you can learn about the finer points of the Thai black metal scene.
Well, we've finally ascended to memehood. It's been almost, frankly, it's pleasantly surprising that it's already happened. I mean, and granted, memehood with like less than 10 people, but it still counts.
It still counts. Honestly, we should have just, wrapped up the show the first time someone did it, unsolicited. It's like, all right, we're good. This is our apex, clearly.
Yeah. We got what we came for.
All right, so for our little rundown for the records, we don't just have a sandwich, we have a club sandwich. I had to make some last-minute replacements, but I went at this trying to do what the Black Metal Guy did last time, covering some shorter releases, and so we got a couple of those sprinkled amidst the full lengths we're covering. But first off, a lot of you probably already heard this, and a lot of you are probably interested in our perspectives on it. We have the second record by Kekht Arakh with Pale Swordsman out on Livor Mortis. One-man project from Ukraine that is starting to get a lot of attention in kind of cool guy online black metal circles, and I think we both have a lot to say about it, so that should be an interesting talk.
All right. And I am up next with Gabestok and their new record, Angang Rådden, altid, or something like that. Right? Danish is new every time we pretend we can pronounce it. And this is out on Strange Aeons Records. Believe that's a Cthulhu reference, something like
Probably.
that. Yeah. Anyway, this band. You may have heard of them through their connection to the Korpsånd circle, which is the big Danish black metal circle. Probably most prominent bands would be Fawnbearer. We've talked about them a few times on the show, but there are a number of other good ones. And Gabestok was on the original Korpsånd comp, and it is very difficult to describe how this band sounds, which I think is a common theme for this show.
Yeah, this is going to be a very unusual kind of episode.
Well, yeah, you're going to get. We've done a lot of very fine-grained songwriting, like how do you write riffs, how do you structure things for the last couple episodes. This time there's going to be a lot of name drops and shit. It's basically unavoidable because there's all sorts of shit entering the blender for all these bands.
Definitely. So next up for me, a couple quick short EP releases. First off, we've got Chapels of Gore with the Venereal Shrine, an independent release. This is a one-man, very strange and abstract kind of Black Death project, but the individual behind it has been involved in a few other very interesting, very unusual projects over the years, so I was excited to see what he was doing under this moniker. And following that, we have Incarceration with Empiricism out on Dawnbreed Records. This is a band that was originally Brazilian, now relocated to Germany, playing a very modern sort of genre blend, extreme metal, a lot of death, a lot of grind, a lot of thrash, some black metal, just about everything, but I think it's all wrapped together pretty well by a really solid sense of songwriting and just a real natural kind of band energy.
All right. And at last, we've got an album called Animate / Isolate by Obsolete. And that sounds like it might be some, I don't know, weird post-hardcore stuff, but and it's not unrelated to that, but it's unusual, I guess, technical death metal. And it's out on Unspeakable Acts, so it's very thrashy tech death, or it's very techy death thrash, or something like that. It's outside of my usual wheel. It's a little fancy for my usual taste, but it's pretty cool and pretty interesting. So we'll check that out.
All right, first up, Kekht Arakh with Pale Swordsman. And you're a little bit more tapped into, I guess, I don't know, what are we calling it? Internet black metal? You know, the kind of stuff that's, moved around on Bandcamp and Instagram a lot these days. And I think this one's kind of taken off in that scene, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started seeing this guy's, his rose and his sword and his sort of pale complexion with thinly veiled shin beard on Bandcamp probably a couple weeks ago. And it's... and maybe also on Instagram a bit, but a lot on Bandcamp. This guy, it's already sold over 600 on Bandcamp in a matter of a week or two, which is
pretty crazy for
really
this kind
up.
of stuff.
Yeah, like I remember Mirror in Darkness by Serpent Collab, which I got pretty early on. That I remember watching that blow up, and it was this is way faster.
Yeah.
Like this guy at this point, this has sold more than records by a lot of major bands online, at least on Bandcamp.
So, This is interesting because I clicked on this originally kind of out of morbid curiosity, because this just screams that it's everything we dislike. Like the things people are saying about this record, talking about like what an emotional journey it is. You got the kind of raw tape black aesthetic.
Talking about how it's not just like the other, not like all the other black metals.
It's totally toxic to everything we like.
It's, I mean, we complain on this show a lot about vampiric black metal, which doesn't mean every band under that label, right? I mean, we like stuff like Grunturd. We think there are some bands that do it better than others and are more authentic than others, but in general, the elaborately aestheticized, showily, quote-unquote, raw, but probably made digitally, vampire aesthetic is pretty played out. I mean, if you want black metal that sounds vampiric, right, listen to Mutilation, listen to Gorgoroth. This is all basically just like fourth-hand mutilation worship. So we've had a lot of critical things to say about things like this. However, right, and that's what this kind of signals visually. It relates itself to that trend. However, I personally, I think the death metal guy in some sense is more receptive to this because he likes French stuff. He likes, he likes Mutilation more than I do. We both like Mutilation. He likes, he likes a certain kind of sentimental melody. I would love to hate this. We just can't. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I was like taken aback at how good this actually is and how much it kind of reverses your expectations, because everything about this screams raw tape black, vampiric, Mutilation meets Seigneur Voland, and it's actually not. It's a pretty straight up, very modern, kind of like post-black or like emo inflected take on Ukrainian black metal. And honestly,
I'd say that's accurate. I expected this to be that sort of vampiric thing is one of those kind of denatured internet scenes that exists all over the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like it's like vaguely tied to France worship, but there's no country. It's probably mostly American, right? Which means that it's everything, right? Yeah. But so like I expected this to sound like that. This is a Ukrainian black metal band. Like the bass music for this is very Slavic.
Yeah, and moreover, it is, well, like you said, it's extremely good. The writing is excellent, and moreover, it does have a sort of auteur vision to it that is really hard to deny. This the guy behind this, named the Crying Orc because of course he is,
which is a Burzum song, right?
Yeah, it's the little clean guitar one on Detzamenging Bar, I believe, and. You can tell this is a guy who has a total grasp of what he wants to accomplish musically and aesthetically. Both sides of the equation reinforce each other. And yeah, it's one of those things where I almost have to grit my teeth and just be like, this is really fucking good. That being said, I think a lot of the people listening to it are going to take the wrong lessons from it. And I think
let's do, let's review the record, and then at the end, you know what I'm going to complain about, and we'll take that as a segue into something about how this will be received, at which point we can grumpy old man.
That's fair. We should be generous to this because it's very good.
This is an undeniably excellent record, and I think having heard it, I feel like we can't even really begrudge it. It's just, it is good, and the thing is, not only is it competently done, right? Because, like, you could listen to something like the first Uwada record and be like, damn, like, yeah, this is some really catchy, like, Motley Crue shit, right? Yeah. But this comes across as much more authentic than I think a lot of this other stuff is. Both in the sense of being grounded in the tradition, understanding what he's doing, and in the sense of there being something heartfelt about it.
Definitely. So in that case, we'll just roll into a sample. Let's listen to a passage off the kind of the second full track on the record called Night Descends. And we'll just talk about some of the influences we're detecting, and I think it's going to be pretty apparent as soon as people hear it that it's like, oh, there really is something here behind the the anti-glitz of the aesthetic. So let's try it. All right, so the riffing, the guitar technique on this record is super, super interesting because it feels like he's a guy who is taking a lot of these very aggressive right-hand techniques from, say, kind of skronky hardcore metalcore bands, and then he's folding that back into black metal. Like, he's using some of these, like, high, like, borderline dissonant chord gestures, but he's using them as, like, an elaboration of the harmonic language of Ukrainian black metal, which is very cool and very interesting, I think.
Yeah, so what's a kind of example of that from what we just... You said aggressive right-hand work, like kind of like fast picks in certain spots?
Well, yeah, you've got the aggressive picking, and when he's... I believe that when he's hitting those, like, high-pitched chords, like in that dun dun down dun dun dun, you know, he's doing sort of like a pick scrape upstroke motion, which is something that you would hear in, say, like Converge or Botch when they're doing those really nasty, kind of ugly dissonant chords. But then he's using it to just give an aggressive tone color to something that is actually harmonically super consonant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
that's...
Oh, go ahead.
No, keep going.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, kind of branching off of that, one of the big things on this record, one of the predominant influences beyond other Ukrainian black metal, it's got to be Transylvanian Hunger. And especially, you know, the, like, back half of the record that nobody listens to anymore. You know, where the melodic structures are kind of in this hazy realm between consonants and dissonance, you know, kind of wandering and looping back in onto themselves. I think that's a huge influence here, and I think he's done the really deep study of how the melodies are constructed on that record and applied a lot of those lessons here.
Yeah, so, like, in those kinds of, in the kind of more, the darker melodies in between on this, that came in between the sort of hook at the beginning and the hook at the end, the sample.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And, well, it's also, in terms of the vampiric thing, it's going to the root, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Like, you know, if you want to think about, like, what's the precedent for the visual and, to some degree, musical aesthetic in mutilation, it's got to be Transylvanian Hunger, right?
Definitely.
And so
I think
you're skipping the mediation by the French bands that have become, through no fault of their own, this kind of dried up reservoir of ideas for now, and going back to something that is, you know, has some eternal. Dark Throne's always got something to say to you if you look in the right part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because we've been talking about Transylvanian Hunger a little bit lately for a few records that we've been covering. And it's interesting because Transylvanian Hunger has somehow become like a forgotten gem. You know, which is, you know, when we were growing up, there were so many bands that were literally just Transylvanian Hunger clones. It was like a joke. It was a niche unto itself. But now it's been almost forgotten. Like, all those bands got supplanted by, like, French worshipping Raw Tape Black. So it's really cool to hear someone going back to it, going back to the origin of all those ideas, like you were saying.
Well, and to the parts that really, I mean, I think you'd agree that the Transylvanian Hunger clone bands were just ripping off 2 or 3 tracks, right?
Yeah, they did not have a complete vision. It was mostly just ripping off the title track itself.
Exactly, yeah.
We'll do a few sad, raw tremolo riffs, and we'll put a thrash beat under it, and that's going to be every song on our record.
Yeah. But yeah, so, in terms of, obviously, I'm going to talk about Slav stuff. And something lately that we've been talking about is, I think you started this, but I can't remember which episode it was on. But I think recently this idea of the influence of major bands kind of percolating back into the underground in unexpected ways. And I mean, like, contemporary, you know, once a contemporary band kind of exits the underground, even if they remain being really good, you often think of it existing on a different plane, and often people, for various reasons, will just stop paying attention to it in the same way. Or, and that's not always the case, right? And so last week we talked about, I suggested that new Lung Toucher split. That Lung Toucher sounded kind of like what would happen if you took some of the more post-black friendly chording in Winterfilleth songs and made it more raw, right? And use that as a base language for UKBM. Or and yeah, so this week, let's talk about that in relation to Kekht Arakh, and just listen for the riff that hits at the drop on this next sample from Thorns, which is the first proper track on the record. Yeah, so what did that remind you of? Especially that big drop.
Honestly, I'm trying to think. I mean, I know some of the stuff you described it as when we talked about this a couple weeks ago when I first showed it to you, but as far as like an immediate comparison, I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Okay, yeah. So what this is, like, this is an interesting example of, like, this guy listens to New Drudk and takes it seriously. And also to, like, Windswept. Specifically, that specific, I mean, literally that specific phrase is, like, this little figure or motif that's, like, all over the last Windswept record, which is outstanding. And I think also, which is basically kind of like simplified Drudk melodies over Hate Forest blasting. High recommendation. But like also more, the last Drudk record had things like that on it too. And it's, you know, Drudk has moved And that often enters the territory where it's no longer the sort of the canonical sort of folky pagan nature black thing, right? The mood becomes more sort of subjective and introspective. The setting becomes more urban. It's clear that Senko is listening to more like post-hardcore and post-black type stuff, and that's all influencing him. But a lot of the riff writing is still fantastic, and this guy seems to be paying attention to that and incorporating it into his own technique in a way that I think is pretty unique and pretty cool, because it's getting pulled back into this more kind of loose, raw, stripped down format.
Yeah, I think that sort of like when we were talking about, reaching back to Transylvanian Hunger, I think that this guy's biggest interest in terms of like post-black is also sort of at its origin. Mm-hmm. I think he's listening to early Life Lover. I think he's probably listening to like the Amazurs EP, stuff like that, where I didn't really think about it that way the first time, but when you said it definitely, there's a certain kind of sad urban black metal riff. There's, because I was talking about, I think it was last week or the week before, it's like, it's like, I think it was the Search Relay, and it's like, okay, it's fucking nighttime, and the moon is full, and I'm walking drunk alongside the river in, like, the industrial district of my city, back to my too small apartment. It's got that energy, that same thing here.
Yeah. The Pale Swordsman is kind of a medieval figure, but I don't think he's not really out there on the steppes. He's not trading lances with the foes of Slavonic Rus.
I think the whole Pale Swordsman character is one of the most interesting and strongest aspects of this record. I mean,
absolutely. Let's talk about him a bit, because I think that'll relate. That and the whole warrior thing will relate to my next sample. But yeah, let's talk about the Pale Swordsman a bit.
Yeah,
shouldn't he just change the name of the band to Pale Swordsman and also change his name from Crying Orc to Pale Swordsman? And please standardize this for us, because it's clearly all about Pale Swordsman.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I don't think... This is getting in kind of deep, but I read the lyrics to this pretty closely, because I've got theories about it. I don't think he is necessarily the Pale Swordsman. I think, like, the lyrics are written from, like, a first-person perspective.
You don't think... So his last... There was a full-length called Night and Love. You think that this was... you think this is not the Pale Swordsman?
No, I think that the character exists outside himself. I think that the Pale Swordsman...
And you think it's a part of the album?
I think it's a part of the album. I think it's probably a theme that's going to continue in the future, because I think that the Pale Swordsman is just a representation of the ennui of modernism. The Pale Swordsman is sort of like wandering through modern life without an enemy to fight. You'll notice in the lyrics, the Pale Swordsman never uses his sword at any point. There's never any conflict. It's always just kind of nostalgic remembrances and a lot of time in nature reflecting on himself. It's interesting. I've got my own theories of what this record might be about, but I think I'd have to ruminate on it more.
Well, there's also kind of the troubadour thing, right? This sort of lover fighter thing. There's a lot of stuff about being sad about girls here. And just sort of like romantic stuff. And it seems like, the Pale Swordsman's maybe more of a... it's like a... maybe the duelist quality to it, but also the sense of like, every lover is a fighter and all that, right?
Well, one thing that's interesting, though, because I was going in that direction too, until I realized that you say there's a lot of stuff about being sad about girls, which seems true, and then you realize that it being a woman, this object of all this sorrow, is only mentioned in the very last track, Crystal, before the outro song. So my pet theory is that, and then if you dig into lyrics, it's not really speaking in it's using kind of romantic...
The last track is like that. Swordsman also has this kind of you that seems to be very obviously about a girl.
You see, because I think it's probably, I think actually that it's sort of a surprise thing. I think it's about somebody that he lost, like a close friend or something. I don't think it's necessarily about like a romantic relationship. I think it's about, the loss of a very close personal relationship, like maybe somebody died or there was a falling out, something like that.
I mean, you think Crystal is just different from that, then?
I think that he might just be using, like, a female character as, like, a stand-in there.
Still hidden, the Castle of Love, but I know how to find it. Crystal ice covers the entire world while she's having a dream of a new world. I mean, I'm not trying to belittle it by saying it's about girls. I'm trying to, like, that's an old, that's how the troubadours got to these deeper sort of metaphysical themes. You know, you identify the beloved with ascent to the realm of, you know, to the Platonic forms or to the Godhead or whatever, right? So I don't mean to say, yeah, I was being a little funny, right, joking about the emo aspect of it, but I don't think it's, I don't mean that to negate the bigger concerns that you're seeing here.
Yeah, no, I think
he's got like the rose, right? You know, it's yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. I think he's like, yeah, you're getting at the way that this points to some bigger stuff, and I think it wouldn't be a good album. It wouldn't be so good, and it wouldn't be so authentic as black metal if it didn't.
Yeah, I think, and the fact that it is so kind of over the top, because definitely, I mean, the first pass of the lyrics, it can definitely seem kind of silly. It is very melodramatic, but that's part of good black metal is melodramatic. You know, good black metal is not about, you know, being reserved and worrying about what people think of your aesthetic choices. So I do appreciate that part a lot.
I don't think it has to be melodramatic per se. I think it can be very cold, but it's certainly not about being cool.
Yeah. Melodramatic's not the right word, but it should be dramatic. It
should be over the top. Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be over the top, and it should be at variance with conventional ideas of good taste or cool.
Mm-hmm.
Different from the idea of like the James Dean or the sort of punk rebel idea of cool, or the sort of cynical artist figure or whatever. But yeah, so we get to. I mean, honestly, for some of the lyrics that are a little more that have the love quality, but are also a little more impersonal, why don't I just read the lyrics to "In the Garden"? Because I want to sample that one next.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so we got "In the Garden." Would you follow me? Would you ever share my fate? If I walk away, I'll be never back again. 7 blades ran into my heart again. Still the same, through the night I make my way. Darkness over the garden. Night reigns and the world suffers. With hands pale like a marble, hold me close as a lover. 8 ancient trees, hide me in your shadows. I said a prayer thrice, but there's only silence. Foliage whisper be heard, and my sentence be told me, to bleed for nothing, pretending that I deserve it. Breathing the fragrance of night, I long for the end, for stars to light up black skies, for a savior to lend me a hand. Darkness over the garden. Night reigns and the world suffers. With hands pale like a marble, hold me close as a lover. Wandering in the night, pale swordsman.
I like he uses that on both In the Garden and on Night Descends.
I think he may actually use that on virtually every track.
And if not, he should have, because it's great.
It's really cool. Yeah, it's one of the coolest. It's a very cool black metal riff call.
Yeah.
But so there you go. So yeah, that is melodramatic. That does have a bit of a a notebook quality to it. However, it's also got this nice gothic fantasy imagery. It's got I know it's got this constant shift. There's a you and hold me close as a lover, right? That can be the as can make it metaphorical, as you would say, right? And there's also, it keeps telescoping back to night reigns and the world suffers and all this, and this is just good quality, lovelorn anime troubadour kind of shit.
Oh yeah, like I said, Kekht Arakh plays sad anime outro black metal exclusively.
Absolutely. The other thing this is like AFI. The Pale Swordsman is very close to the character Davey Havok played on the old AFI albums. This sort of it's romantic, but it's very sexless, and it's kind of like there's a noble warrior heroism to it, even though it's also all gothic and decadent and full of fragrances and textures and whatever. It's never about like boning chicks, right? And it's
definitely not.
And it's never even about not boning chicks. Right. It's about something higher, damn it.
When you reach my level, boning or not boning will no longer mean anything to you.
Exactly. So I think these are pretty cool lyrics. They definitely fit, as you say, just the music and the lyrics and the character and the image all reinforce each other. One thing I was going to say, and you have something to say about this too, right? We've got these mystic numbers here, and I was thinking, well, these are probably nonsense, but it's good nonsense in this context because it makes you project this larger, mysterious scheme of things, right? Mm-hmm. But you've got some ideas about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, specifically when he's talking about 7 blades ran into my heart again, which is also referred to on Night Descends, where he says, 7 blades, 7 swords, light pours casted by the full moon. Specifically, that's specifically Christian imagery, and it's Catholic in particular, because it refers to what in some circles are called the 7 dolors or the 7 sorrows of the Virgin Mary. Associated with seeing the crucifixion of her son. And in a lot of, stained glass reliefs you'll see on cathedrals, especially I think the South Americans are really into it, the South American Roman Catholics. You'll see images of Mary with 7 swords piercing her heart.
Cool.
I just thought that seems a little bit too specific, that imagery, to be completely coincidental.
No, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, 7 itself is just that's the go-to magic number. I mean, because it's magic in every tradition, in so many Western traditions. However, the 7 swords pierce my heart. I gotta say, I think you're right there.
Yeah. I think now 8 ancient trees. That probably doesn't mean anything. But the 7 swords, I noticed that immediately.
Yeah. Well, we've got we can try to give you a little more mileage here, right? We got we got some 3 too, potentially Trinitarian, maybe. What did he say? Thrice I
said a prayer thrice, but there's
I said a prayer
silence.
Thrice, right? I long for a savior to lend me a hand. There is some kind of maybe absent God thing, which fits with the chivalric thing,
Oh yeah, and I'd actually, if I wanted to make an aggressive bid for this being a secret Christian album, you look at the lyrics on the final one on Swordsman.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah,
yeah, we will.
Yeah, no, there's definitely and I don't necessarily mean I don't mean in an annoying unblack way. I just mean he's interested in this sort of the existential dilemmas of this knightly character, and if you're dealing with that kind of territory, you're in kind of medieval Catholic territory.
Definitely. We should probably listen to In the Garden, shouldn't we?
Oh, yeah. So this is, it's a big album. We got to say things about it. But yeah, so with In the Garden, great song. What's interesting is that this is by far the most martial track on the record. And this addresses, I guess we'll just listen to the song and then I'll say the thing I was going to say. But we never see him draw his sword in the lyrics, but this is definitely the most sword-oriented track. So if you got him, raise him.
Darkness over the garden, night reigns.
Okay, so maybe a little bit of riding down the foes of glorious Slavonic Rus.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I love that riff, man. And you know that for me, it's always like the proof of quality is like if somebody's doing something that's like departure from whatever BM norms they're referencing, I love hearing that they can do something that is down the line, right? And given that this guy's dealing with all this kind of delicate, sentimental, internal, individual emotion kind of stuff, to just whip out a mighty pagan warrior riff in the...
Well, yeah, you have to prove that you've mastered the rules to qualify to break them.
Exactly. And, you know, that's like an A-level riff, right? There are better... There are, of course, a number of better Slavonic black metal riffs than that, but those are the riffs written by the masters, right? And then there are... Mm-hmm. This is on a level with their, like, B-level riffs, right? Which is saying something.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. Mm-hmm. And another thing I want to say is it's very refreshing to hear a guy who seems to give a shit about vocal rhythm in black metal.
Yeah.
He's, like, there's clearly a lot of... Because, like, this is lyrically dense music compared to a lot of black metal. And it just seems like there really is an effort to create an internal groove, you know, within the vocal delivery. Which is something that's just... It's such an oversight for most black metal bands that it really sticks out when someone cares about it.
That, again, relates to the idea that it seems like he, like... A, actually likes black metal in the fullest sense of the word, and B, listens to old bands and classic bands like Darkthrone and Drug, where people put effort into these things.
Yeah, all the things that you kind of can get away with not caring about, but if you do care about them, it really elevates what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, also it has to do with the particular nature of his vocals. He's got this kind of goblin kind of quality, and he's using it... he knows you can use it percussively in this rhythmic way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so last sample. Let's go to the end of the record. So this is the second to last track called Crystal. And here you're going to hear some of the most outwardly kind of emo or post-black inflected stuff. But also, you hear the way he manipulates those ideas to be completely his own. Like, the riffs you're going to hear are going to remind you of a lot of things, but ultimately, it can't come from anyone but this guy. He's got a real sense of his own style. So, let's listen to this one. Man, that is just big fucking riff after big fucking riff.
Yeah, that's just gorgeous. You know, this is basically just... A lot of this is stuff that other people have attempted, and just... This guy just has nailed it, right?
Yeah. No, it's... I mean... And he's able to use so many of these kind of figures that... It wouldn't... Nobody else would stick the landing. Like that opening... Yeah, like that opening like Midwest emo arpeggiated riff. I mean, that's basically like a mineral riff or something like that. And plenty of people have attempted that in a black metal context, and it almost never works. But there's something about the way he executes it, and it hangs together.
Yeah, well, it's clear not only does he actually like black metal, aside from whatever is trendy right now, but he also actually likes the source material for the more post and emo and whatever ideas. And, you know, with a lot of those things, the bands that were canonical for those genres succeed because they knew how to write certain kinds of rock and, relative to metal, I guess, pop melodies. That certain kinds of melodic structures that metal people are not very good at and don't understand, right? And this guy understands that.
Yeah. No, it's obviously the star is going to be that last riff where he's just hanging on that one shining chord for like 1 3/4 measures. Like, you think it's going to go somewhere. No, it's not. He's just going to stick on that big shining chord.
That's a great example of something that might be sort of is technically not, like, he's not hitting a tritone, but it skronks a lot. There's a lot of tension, a lot of, that's a good example of getting a dissonance effect in an unexpected way.
Well, yeah, and he uses that bass rumble under it with just that little half-step rise that just imbues it with so much tension.
Dude, you know? Yeah, the bass there is great. Yeah, and that thing at the end is just another thing like, oh, you listen to Druid. You listen to also the Swan Road and like droney, aggressive Druid and all.
Yeah,
this.
You listen to the hard stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's just where it needs to fall, because everything before that is like perfectly executed, sentimental, romantic stuff, and then you hit that, and it's still sentimental and romantic. It's just a different register.
Yeah, and that's he's good at not dwelling on a single mood for too long.
Yeah. To listen to it more really is to like it better, honestly. Last night I listened to the full thing for the first time. I went jogging at dusk, you know, you know, like bright crescent moon out, you know, the flowers are coming out. This was perfect for that.
Yeah.
And every time you hear it, you get tired. You just hear, "Wandering in the night, pale swordsman." You're like, okay, I'm gonna keep going. But yeah, it's a really, I mean, I think, yeah, this guy understands something about the world, and he conveys it.
Yeah, so it's an excellent record, but then everyone's going to take the wrong lessons from it. I think that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. Should we address the last track now, or?
I mean, I guess we could. I mean, it's, I like it a lot for what it is. I know you find it unacceptable.
Well, why would you just put that? Why would you put it on the album? So the last track, you're better suited to characterize what the last track is.
Oh, it's literally just like a simple little piano piece accompanied by kind of shoegazy clean vocals, and
those are not shoegazy.
Well, they're kind of mumbly, you know,
It sounds like a musical written for children. This would be like Kermit the Frog would be in another scene, and Kermit is cool. Right?
Well, I think it secretly comes from like emo hip hop. Like I'm pretty sure the direct reference point for it is something like XXX Tentacion's "I Spoke to the Devil in Miami" or something like that. I like it. I like it as a way to wrap up the whole thing, but I can definitely see why you would hate it.
Yeah, well, just why put it... I don't understand what it... Couldn't you just write like a... if you wanted to do some sort of really kind of on-the-nose gesture, aren't there like 10 billion other... Couldn't you do like just a full shoegaze song, or a full emo song, or a strummy acoustic song, or even some weird kind of beat-driven hip-hoppy thing without the whiny emo vocals? It's just like...
I don't know.
You know what? Like, even there's a part in the middle of this record that literally sounds like chill beats to study and relax to, and I was like, the death metal guy warned me there would be things like this, and you know what? I'm rolling with it. It fits the anime vibe. It is. It's just 2 minutes. The record is so good that I suspended my disbelief for that and enjoyed it. I cannot say that for the last track. I'm just glad he didn't put the last track in the middle of the record. I don't think it's really a strike against the album, because to me, you could just unselect that one on your player.
I gotcha. So moreover, though, so beyond that, I think we both have concerns about, because this is getting huge very quickly, and I think that, I'll say my concern is probably the same as yours, which is everyone's going to think what makes this great is the most sentimental parts of it, without understanding that the reason that they work and the reason they land is because it's tempered and balanced by everything else.
For sure that. Absolutely. And also, you can see this if you search YouTube comments or Bandcamp comments. People think of this as quote-unquote lo-fi or raw black metal or something.
Mm-hmm.
He does use a kind of raw production. You could tell he paid careful attention to the sound, and this album sounds great.
Yeah.
Right? This is not, by any black metal standards, raw in a way that is difficult or abrasive. But people are going to think that this is just, or people do, I think, oh my god, everything else that sounds like this sucks, but this is brilliant. It's just so good, right? It's like, you like it because it's poppy.
Yeah.
This is not particularly, you get a lot of people saying oh, don't usually like raw black metal, don't usually like black metal, but I love this, blah, 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 right? This is just going to, this is one of those things. It's going to be like the Migla effect, where people think of Migla as dissonant or something, or the same thing as 90s true black metal or something. And it's the band is fantastic. You can't speak against Migla. I've listened to them as much as anything, really. But it's the response to it. It's inevitable with any music genre, and autists like us can't prevent it, right? We're screaming into the wind, right? There's a game of telephone being played with influences, and over time things get distorted. And this guy really fucking gets it, and that's why he's able to pull off what he's doing. But a lot of people are not going to hear that.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
And welcome back to Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast. We are here with Gabestok's N-Gang rådden, altid rådden. I don't usually drink a lot when we record these shows because I like to keep my wits about me. At least haven't since the first few months of it, but definitely pour myself a second round for this because how could you not? So this is the so this is part of the Korpsånd circle. This is they're a group of you probably are familiar with it. A label associated with it is Nattatal, Nattetale. You probably don't pronounce it. It's probably just Nattatal or something, right? Is a label associated with it. It's good kind of black metal dungeon synth, but not really. In an interesting band called Aräkh that's associated with it, and another one called something like Jordslate. I'm spitballing. Yes, it's Jordslate. Like Earth something. Jordslaet, and of course Fawnbearer. So this group of Danish bands play kind of for the most part, kind of stompy, punk-influenced heathen black metal. It would really be the Danish analog to the Legion Blotan scene in the UK. And all these are, or maybe the Horrible Room scene in Russia. These are all networked with each other. They were all influenced by the Bonal, Klaxon Records, and kind of this set of black metalish stuff that started coming out of the Mysterious Sky hardcore scene in the US in the late 00s. And now it's gone. It's mutated a lot, and now it's just from sounding kind of just like hardcore at the beginning. It now sounds very different. But yeah, so that's the context these guys come from. This band is seen as something of an outlier in terms of that sound, which is normally very austere. I think before I give any more, I heard the Korpsånd comp, and I vaguely remember this band and that their tracks were cool, but that's it. So when I went into, and I think they've done a full length before this. So I went into this cold. They did Tre in 2019. So I went into this relatively cold. You went into it totally cold. Let's just listen to the first track on the record. It's only like a bit over 3 minutes. We're going to listen to the whole thing. Trek Stick It. That's fucking sick.
You remember that small niche of, like, heavy metal themed horror movies of the 80s? This is like one of those done correctly, you know?
Nice. Oh, I think I just figured out their name. I was trying to figure out what Gabestok was referring to, and I was like, is that a name for a wand? And then I was like, no, they're different names for wands. It's got a Viking in the stocks. It's got to have something to do, or maybe a skeleton. A skeleton in the stock. So it's got to, you've thieved, or you've swived the wrong wife, and you are now in the stocks in the town center. And the children are throwing turnips at you for your great debauchery.
Oh man! So yeah, that's awesome.
That's one way to start a record, right?
Yeah, that definitely is. I mean, well, I guess you're gonna really have a lot more to say about the influences here than I can, because this is just totally in your wheelhouse of stuff that you're familiar with and you're into.
Yeah, well, if you want to do a first impressions thing, then go, so I don't spurg out and, like, we never get to... yeah, it's almost more interesting. Shoot, yeah, what do you make of this?
I mean, I think this is just... I mean, I guess my take isn't super interesting. It's just, it's a really kind of perfected idea of, kind of garage punk meets heavy metal. Obviously, there's black metal in here, but the black metal for a large part of this music is really just used to create a certain, like, tonal aesthetic. I mean, musically, from top to bottom, this record is pretty much a straight-up combination of, kind of raunchy old-school punk and trad or thrash metal. And there's stuff that this kind of reminds me of, like, for instance... it reminds me a little of, like, Sabat from Japan. I don't know how much of them you've listened to.
Enough to know the deal. I like Abigail a lot.
Yeah, oh yeah, Abigail, definitely. Barbados,
this is for sure like Abigail and Barbados, and that's related to the things I would compare this to. So that's a good call.
Yeah, the Japanese metal punk thing, and I think that we kind of talked past each other in the notes because, like, the stuff from that scene that I'm familiar with is more from the side of, like, metalheads who were also listening to punk, and I think you know a lot more about the stuff that was more punks also listening to heavy metal, It's a fine distinction, but I think it's an important one,
Yeah, these two things are related to each other more than they seem to be, because, like, the metalheads talk about Abigail and Barbados, and the punks talk about the 80s stuff, but I think if you asked if you asked Abigail, they'd be like, oh, we're really into Jism, right? Yeah. So let's get to that. I mean, man, yeah, basically this band comes out of exactly the social context that produced the black metal guy. I mean, I feel like I know these guys, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it's, this is, like, a bunch of things that were sort of cool on the punk metal internet in the Blogspot days, right? Just coming together, just like, especially, the bass, the culture, I think this feels more like 80s Japanese metal punk worship than anything else. And not in terms of necessarily any specific identifiable riff or technique as the sum of the whole, but the idea that you have these flamboyant, almost hair metal, heavy metal melodies, often moving at a mid-tempo in a way that, like, a lot of maiden worshipping bands would speed it up more, right? Often moving as a mid-tempo combined with sort of brutal vocals and a sort of kind of unhinged punk attack and production. It's like puts it in the territory, like, not just Jism, which GISM, which presumably people have sort of heard of, but also, like, Gastunk is a band that used to be a big name drop with this stuff. They started, like, more D-beat and went more speed metal over time. Not that I knew Gastunk super well back in the day. It was actually, like, harder. It was actually harder to, before YouTube, it was harder to find certain things. right? And harder to find like the right things by them. But like it really feels like this is strongly informed by that era. Also, that was around the time people were getting into like Manila Road and various other kinds of like the other kinds of like gloriously dumb American power metal. Like,
that's actually because Manila Road was always one of the smarter ones too.
well, in relatively territory. Yeah, and I don't mean that in an insulting way, right? Like they knew what they were about, but what they were doing was this kind of like beefy, chugging, kind of punkish power metal, right?
Well, I would say another big touchstone for this, and it's a little bit more towards the back half of the record, would be like old heavy psych rock. I think is a big ingredient here. You know,
well, yeah,
I think these guys,
there's a lot of keyboards.
There's a lot of keyboards. You get some of that, you know, that little bit of like Doors inflection, but I'd say more like these guys probably seriously listen to like Blue Cheer and Budgie and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they probably like the Stooges and a bunch of, you know, a bunch of stuff that would be classed as proper garage punk or whatever. There is that. There is also, I mean, obviously the black metal influence is there in terms of the vocals, and in some ways, in some places, I think there's more than you'd expect on the back end when it gets more psychedelic, or like kinds of black metal you wouldn't normally associate with this style. But this is just like, in terms of this confluence of punk and like raw noisy punk, BM, heavy metal. It's just very much like these guys came up in a certain time and place. They probably read Cosmic Curse, or they're a little younger and were influenced by guys who are into that stuff. And it's the bands at that time that were doing that were nowhere near as good as these guys.
Yeah, now this is I say it at one point in the notes, this is very clearly like super accomplished musicians slumming it for this record. Yeah. Like, you can tell these guys are incredibly smart and use all that intellect to make music that's exactly as dumb as it should be, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. They're synthesizing and drawing all this stuff that was culturally related and that people understood as somehow being related, right? But you'd get these different projects that would synthesize two of these elements, or that would sort of like fetishistically attempt to distill one, right? Mm-hmm. Like back in the day, there were a lot of like Japanese raw punk worship bands or whatever, or, you know, or you'd get someone trying to like recreate a certain sound of like punky 80s death rock or whatever. Or you'd get that whole group of like, a little before that even, there was that whole like kind of corny but kind of cool metal punk death squad thing, where people were like doing this sort of English Dogs, Broken Bones kind of road warrior punk metal. And you get all these weird worship projects, but these guys are like, there's something about that confluence of things, and they're gonna distill all of it into a real sound and record.
Yeah, but it also feels very... This is not to say that it doesn't sound organic. This does sound like... It sounds like this is just all the things these guys listen to, and they started a band, and it naturally was this, because this is where their interests centered.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, kind of the point is that, like, those things were all that were popular at that time. People saw connections between them, and there was, objectively, in musical history, these weird resonances between them, even though they were happening in different scenes and in different places in the 80s, right? And in the early 90s. And these guys are picking up on all of that, and there is a single common impulse there, and these guys have clarified what that is.
Definitely. So, well, I guess I should do a sample. So we've been talking about like heavy metal and punk a lot, and obviously that is the predominant core of this music. However, I sampled one of the most black metal moments on the record, because I think that you imagine a band like this, you imagine, okay, so kind of like punky, kind of heavy metal and kind of black metal, you imagine something like Abigail. But then you start to listen to the sort of black metal influences that are actually on this record. The way the black metal comes out is super interesting.
Yes,
It's not the sort of thing you'd expect.
There's actually very little quote-unquote first-wave black metal on here.
That's true.
Which is except for Hellhammer. But let's go. Sam.
Yeah, there's no venom.
No Bathory, no venom, and those would usually be contaminating anything like this. Not that those are bad bands, right? But that just, like, that is a troped to death thing. Not
definitely. So let's listen to Ner Onskap Giddis. That's a guess at pronunciation.
I don't know, yeah.
Giddis? You know, something like that? All right.
Yeah.
So where is that clean vocal hook thing coming from? Because I'm drawing a blank. That's not like anything I've heard in metal before.
You mean just sort of doing this clean vocal thing that's like just doubling? You're not playing chords, you're playing a trem riff that has its own melody, and the vocalist is just doubling it in this kind of like deliberately naive way.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, I was wondering, it's like, is that something that you might have heard on, like, one of those weird punk records, you know? It's just, like, it's not a thing.
I don't think it's... Yeah, maybe... I mean, it's weird enough that it could be Japanese speed metal punk, but it's, yeah, I mean, it could just that they decided to do it. The only thing I've heard that sounds like that, both in terms of doing that and the melodic contour, is a band that, who knows, these guys either love this band or would not like the comparison at all, but Kvelertak.
Yeah, I could see
this
that.
record could almost be, if you change the production, note for note, just the imaginary first Kvelertak album.
Yeah, like, I can see that. Yeah.
Like, the influences are kind of similar in a lot of ways, especially that first song, just this sort of like coke-snorting, stompy heavy metal with screaming. Like, it's very much that. And the way that Kvelertak incorporated cleans in this kind of unusual and non-obnoxious way, it would be things like that. These kinds of, like, shout-along kind of Scandinavian melodies just thrown over trem riffs.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So kind of like what I was saying before we played the sample, where the black metal on this is coming from is interesting. Because, one, there's a lot of Under a Funeral Moon all over this record. Which is very odd, because that's kind of like that's not the Dark Throne record I would associate with good time heavy metal, but, you know.
You mean in the blasty parts, right?
The blasting parts, even that, like, slow chug riff, I mean, that was not in the Shadow of the Horns. That was some of the darker, slow stuff off Under a Funeral Moon, I feel.
That stuff, there's a lot of that on this record, and that also reminds me of just Burzum.
Yeah, just straight, like, self-titled Burzum.
Yeah, and or like even like Philosophem, this kind of like trudging stuff with keyboards hanging over it, and these kind of descending melodies on the guitar. Dum 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 dum. I don't know. It just, like, a lot of it, I agree with you, the idea that, like, there's a lot more early second wave stuff on this record than you would expect. And a lot of it is kind of, like, heavy mid-paced stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would actually say, as weird as it is to say, I feel like I'm hearing, like, kind of later Mayhem, like Chimera or Ordo ad Chaos. Obviously, they're not doing the kind of, like, skronky, like, pseudo DSO thing that Mayhem was doing on Ordo ad Chaos, but the contours of the more kind of dissonant abstract riffs really remind me of some of those very strange angular minimal riffs you would hear from later Mayhem.
Well, I don't know later Mayhem, so I can neither confirm nor deny.
I mean, that's me spitballing, man. Like, a lot of this is going to be pulling on weird threads.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I agree that, like, one thing that makes this good is that the idea of black metal they're drawing on is not the one that people assume to be proximate to the other influences here. Because in some sense, if your thing is, oh, we're going to combine Bathory with speed metal, it's like, so you're going to combine speed metal with speed metal?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, oh, like, you know, oh, it's like revolutionary. It's like, you know, first wave black metal meets Motorhead. Like, so you're gonna write Motorhead songs with screaming?
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, you're gonna write Motorhead songs with screams that don't sound as hard as Lemmy. You know, it's so a lot of that stuff was this kind of redundant. You know, a lot of this stuff was kind of pointing out redundant connections between these musics, right? Things that were, like, pointing out the obvious in the same way that Death Heaven was like, hey, did you know that black metal is pretty atmospheric? And this is not like that at all. I would say that this album is also a good case for your concept of 1.5 wave.
Yeah. Oh, did I come up with 1.5 wave? I thought that was you.
It could have predated. Yeah, I think you came up with it, because I remember thinking that was a good concept, death metal guy. This is years before Terminus, but yeah, like this idea of just like there being this before second wave is codified, this kind of like really early Norwegian stuff and Swedish stuff. You know, Morbid is 1.5 wave, or Merciless.
Yeah, Old Funeral is 1.5 wave.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. I mean, I think early Burzum and early Mayhem, and just before, say, like you get Gorgoroth and Melodic Immortal and these bands that are sort of like codifying the sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before Emperor's full length comes out and whatever, right? There's this idea of very primordial second wave black metal when those bands were all in dialogue directly with 80s metal punk and other things like that. So that is cool. The other band I think of a lot on this record is Hades in terms of those trudging riffs.
Yeah, I can definitely feel Hades on this one.
Like Hades and Hades in terms of, like, you pointed out, I think, how much Hades sounds like Bathory, right? And it's like,
yeah, Hades sounds a lot like Bathory, or maybe, you know, I'm not super well acquainted, but maybe Hades sounds more like Isengard or something like that.
Wouldn't have been they were sort of contemporaneous, but that kind of thing, right? That kind of idea of like how this record seems very invested in producing second wave effects with 80s and 80s material. And Hades was doing that in the 90s, right? They were using like Blood, Fire, Death type stuff to make this kind of droning second wavy music. So anyway, just because we like this record so much, I had another sample. Here you get to hear the thrash connection more. For this, other kinds of things relevant to this would be, like this, the UK had metal punk bands like this. We've talked about Broken Bones before on this show. A really big one would be Sacrilege, who I highly recommend to everyone. Started out as D-beat, became more like a really ragged, aggressive speed metal band. Shit like that. So here you go. Here's some thrash. This is on Retningslos Vred.
You know why that's an interesting thrash riff in a band like this?
What?
Because they let it be a thrash riff. There was no effort made to make it a black thrash riff or to, bridge the gap in any way other than playing it at kind of a weirdly slow tempo. Mm-hmm. It's like that, the ending kind of Phrygian figure. At a certain point, they don't let that happen in black thrash riffs anymore. Here, it's literally like a Kill 'Em All riff or something, which is what makes it so interesting.
If anything, it was more the sort of delicate phrasing on it. That's maybe a little more black metal-y. But yeah, it's just a bulldozer thrash riff.
Yeah, and it's people don't let those parts be themselves anymore, It's always how can we, I want to use thrash technique, but I don't want to be invested in what that music actually sounded like. So how do I just kind of bulldoze mayhem intervals into this rhythmic framework?
Yeah. At the end, you'd go da 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 da. You'd go down by a half step or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a good, solid, fucking sick thrash riff, and you could hear more of that kind of breakdowny material with the sort of hammer horror keys over it, and that has this kind of Burzum or Dark Throne kind of weightiness to it that you just wouldn't expect here.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's good that you brought up the keys, because that was something I was going to talk about in my last sample. Because probably the closest thing that I would compare this to that we've covered on the show, it was a few weeks back, and it was that Insertus record. Do you remember that one?
That's a really good comparison, yeah.
And Insertus was similar to this in the idea of building very extreme metal out of 80s kind of proto-extreme parts. If you guys haven't listened to it, it's a super weird, super cool record that was doing stuff you're taking pretty much straight Bathory worship material at certain points, but then you're overdriving everything so much with modern death metal standards, it sounds completely alien. But a very important thing for Insertus were these constant keyboards that they were using. Very strange, kind of lurking in the background, but paradoxically driving a lot of the melody and texture on the
More
record.
Elaborate than you'd expect.
Definitely more elaborate than you'd expect. They're not just intros and outros. They're integral to the music. And Gabestok is doing, I think, a lot of the same stuff with their use of keyboards. So let's listen to, excuse me, Smitsom. And you're going to hear these really interesting kind of ghostly keyboards. And I really like how they adjunct that to kind of stomp your more traditional black metal riffing.
All right, cool.
So yeah, the way the keyboards kind of slide into the music there is interesting, because it's a surprisingly complicated key melody over a really simple riff, but they don't push it to the front of the sonic space at all. They leave it to kind of hang out in the background. Yeah. And of course, you've got, similar to Insurus actually, that really long swelling attack on the keys, so it's hard to tell exactly what the melody is. That's a very strange parallel to see in both of those bands. But yeah, it's and the keyboards are something where it's like you can almost miss them because they're so quiet in the production, but they're kind of always there. I think they're used on every song, but only as this very subtle augmentation. I think it's interesting because it seems so melodically important, but they never let it take the center stage.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's even there in the first track, in the big Kekht Arakh track, and I think it adds a lot. I think it adds a lot to it because he's just laying on the keys in the background. It's yeah. So that's a good track to sample also, because that's something in some sense that's like a thing so important to this band that goes unspoken, which is like Ildjarn, right? Which is fundamental certainly for the wing of punk dudes who sort of turned into black metal dudes. Right, Ildjarn is sort of formative for that. Certainly, like the House of First Light had Ildjarn worship stuff like Mongrel before they went Slav, right? You can hear Ildjarn residue in a ton of these bands, in Ifernach, for instance, or whatever, right? There's just people from hardcore discovering that black metal could be this thing other than like, Emperor, right, through Ildjarn. And that track has the stompy 1-2 boom tap boom tap thing that at a certain point people were literally calling the I beat, and you'd say that like somebody has an I beat band. Right, like in the same way that you'd say D-beat. This
is such a strange... I know you've been talking to me about bands like that for so long, but it's like... Wow, that really does exist in a wing of black metal that I just never come across ever, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and a lot of those bands were kind of trendy and didn't have that much to say, right? It's the people who have moved on from that and carried it into different sounds and who've done cool things with it, right? But, like, I Beat Black Metal is fundamental for Legion Blowtan, too, or whatever, right? But the funny thing is, like, credit where credit is due. You know, we got to read the comments, right? And a YouTube commenter, Siebenzunden says, I like it a lot, but I can't hear any Ildjarn in it, relative to the channel writes Ildjarn influence. And it's like, yeah, this record really doesn't sound like Ildjarn at all, right? I mean, at all. But there's a place where there's residual Ildjarn influence in the stompy 1-2 beat and in the way the guitars are syncopating over it, right? I missed part of that riff, but the way it turns around there is kind of Ildjarny too. However, I get what he means when he says he can't hear it, because like even there, like it's being used in a different way. It's not like Ildjarn fetishizing. And the sense of internal groove in it, like Ildjarn is almost, it's very rhythmic, but it's almost anti-groove. Mm-hmm. You can dance to Ildjarn, and by dance, obviously, I mean, you know, mosh or whatever, you can, but like it's weird, right? Whereas this has like a sense of fun internal groove to it that is very punk. This band also does a cool thing there. A great thing about this band is that they don't fetishize any of this music in the way people did when they first discovered it. So yeah. They feel like they're up to the task of playing it. It's not worship. They respect it as a peer. Yeah, they're using, yes, these are like, okay, we can draw on this and this and this, and they're not slavishly trying to recreate it. And so you get this I-beat thing, and then it just rolls into double pedal bass, right? People back in the day would not do that, right? Because double pedal bass is both heavy metal and classic second wave black metal and fun in all the ways that you're not supposed to, right? You know?
Well, I mean, I like the way you're kind of talking around how this doesn't sound like Ildjarn. I mean, I would just say, I mean, this sounds like music, so it immediately isn't like Ildjarn.
Hey, Ildjarn is good.
Fine, I respect Ildjarn, but Ildjarn is the definition of music adjacent, as you like to say.
yeah, that is true. Yes, this is very rich sonically. There's a lot of melodies in it. There's a lot of textures in it, and there's like idea after idea after idea just ricocheting off each other. Right? This is not austere, and it's got a bunch of fucking flowers on the cover.
Yeah, what's this shit? right, we are back after a bracing duopoly of Japanese metal punk with something equally extreme in a different direction. This is Chapels of Gore with the Venereal Shrine. I just stumbled across this kind of at random, and then I got extra intrigued when I saw it was Ray Rivera behind this project. Almost certainly none of you are familiar with him, but he is a guy who has done a lot of projects over the years on the very fringe edges of black metal and noise music. Like, he's done a couple gore noise projects that I listened to back in the day, like Black Putrefaction. And he was also affiliated with, he did a project called Jesu Masturbator, which had ties to bands like Thy Feeble Savior, and just a lot of, like, very fringe, very weird, intensely serious, bizarro Black Death stuff.
Was this, what labels was this associated with?
Fucking none. Just, like, random, guys with
so this is another thing. This is another thing in the category of things only the death metal guy knows about.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, like, they would start labels and put out, like, a 7-inch and then fold them and then start a new label. Ray Rivera himself has had all kinds of, like, weird noise labels and stuff like that, just doing cassette editions of shit. So this really reaches back towards not only his own history, but a sort of micro niche of truly bizarre sort of black noise stuff. Like, a good example would be Raytoff Ruo, who...
Oh, I vaguely remember that.
I fucking love Raytoff Ruo. Did a record called, I believe is Boiled in Goat's Blood, or something like that. Totally fucking insane, unhinged, not really music stuff. I think there were rumors that instead of a drum machine, he just sampled himself hammering different objects with a literal hammer and used those samples as drum beats, just like
that's him hitting cool.
Him hitting plywood and aluminum siding and shit.
Oh yeah, that one's a person.
Yeah, that was a human being. That's the kick drum, But then the thing that this is most closely tied to is, for those who haven't heard it, Havohe's Kimbaten and Premaster, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. Which is funny because I believe that album exists both before and after and outside of time itself. It's very possible that everything we perceive is merely the radiation coming off of that album, like it is the totality of existence. But, so what did you think of this? I mean, this is just a short little thing. It's only like a little 10-minute EP, but what did you think of this stuff?
Yeah, well, obviously, Kimbatinian vibrates at a frequency too fundamental for my uninitiated ears. So, I'm
kind of surprised because, like, that's a lot like a lot of the really weird industrial techno you like, I think.
It's true, but that has riff coming from the drums.
That's true. Kimbatinian
has completely standardized mechanoid blasting, which is the point, I know. Right, it has these kind of like Havahe Von Pro Fanatica blasts, and then just this highly textural. Yeah, it's standardized rhythm, and then just this kind of amorphous textural stuff over it. At least if I remember it correctly.
Yeah, no, I actually I got to talk to Paul Ledney about it one time, and he confirmed that there were no guitars. It was just industrial noises.
No, I think I really admire it. That's what I was going to say. I think, like, when I heard Kimbatinian, I mean, this was years ago. I could have revised my opinion on this. I should listen to it again, right? But when I listened to it, my impression was I really like the idea here, and he's moving in the right direction. I just couldn't get into exactly that execution of it. If you listen to really austere industrial techno like Ancient Methods or a lot of Regis, where they're like they disdain the idea of synths, like you get riffing effects from both just like groovy dancey drums and like highly really just juicy kicks and things like that, like there's kind of like pitch in the drums. And you get just obviously the fun danceable rhythms and the like you get noise being used in a riffy way, bent noise or whatever, whereas Kembetinian is a lot more just like,
pretty much.
but I feel like Kembetinian will be remembered as like one of those crucial. Maybe people will like it as much as you do eventually, but I feel like if nothing else, I can agree it's probably one of those crucial R&D records, like the Thorns demos. And this is proof of that, because if this is influenced by Kembetinian, I like this a lot. And I think that this has like the one or two extra things I would need to enjoy that record more.
Yeah, I definitely get that. There's more. This is bringing Kembetinian a little bit closer to music again.
All I need is one, with something like this, either you have the groovy drums or like all I need is one note.
Yeah, I need something to hold on to here.
And this guy's good at one note.
Oh yeah, he's excellent at one note. So in that case, like I said, this is 6 tracks in 10 minutes. So let's just listen to a whole song. Let's listen to Grotesque Impurities so people know just how awful this sounds. I guess I never thought about it before, but there's no guitars used on this at all, are there?
Probably not.
Yeah, this is purely synth-driven.
Yeah, and I like that idea a lot. So you got your pummeling black metal percussion, and you've got your noise effects, and you've got your just little touch of melody coming from synths. So there's an interesting thing, which is that unless I got it completely wrong and clicked on the wrong track, which I don't think I did, you noted in your note something about a strange major key melody.
Mm-hmm.
I swear on that track, unless there's some other track on the record that sounds like this, and maybe it was just late at night, and we'll find out. But I think that melody sounds different when you play it on speakers. Because when I was listening to it before, I was hearing some sort of melody that was like a really standard pagan black metal melody, like dum, 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 or something like that. Some like Dorian scale thing, that would be stock, but elsewhere, but just here adds a nice bit of color to it. But whatever this is, it sounds different on my head. If we're talking about the same track, this sounds way different on my headphones, and it does sound major key, and it's way weirder.
Just a dun 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 dun. Dun.
Yeah.
It's like some Yanni shit, Or
like an actual shoegaze type melody. It's like, but it's just kind of suspended, right? It's not even, I don't think it's even like at the root of whatever scale. It's just kind of hanging.
Yeah, it just kind of like is there, and I think that it's like a deliberate mockery sort of thing, especially with like when it gets to the end of that loop a few times, the feedback just saws it in half and does something like much more dramatic and medieval. Like, because we've talked a little bit about the idea of using major key melodies to provoke feelings of like wrongness and disgust when you place them in a context that's otherwise super dissonant and unfriendly. And this is like a song built around that one conceit, is how horrible can we make this? Like it's a deliberately like saccharine kind of idiotic
saccharine,
major key melody. Yeah, saccharine. Yeah. I've never heard it in real life, you know. I just read it. Yeah, so it's like it's this sort of foul parody of that, and then it gets wiped out by the noise, and that's fucking cool, man.
And isn't that a lot like tactics that you heard on that Reverie Mid-Malakt?
Yes, I was going to say that, especially when the searing feedback stuff comes in. That's very much like Reverie Mid-Malakt. And I mean, you were the guy that really pointed that out, the way they'll use these sort of like simpering kind of melodies that get annihilated by like the electronic noise. It's I really like the idea of building songs around these meta conceits. You know, these aren't really songs on this record here. They are based around an abstract non-musical idea given musical form.
Yeah, you just take yeah. So in this case, it's just like the song is about chewing up a melody.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, no, this is really cool, and, you know, it's just got that, I like the hollow tone on that synth melody, and just the pummeling and the screeching noise I enjoy also, so.
Definitely.
So here's my sample. I mean, these are short tracks, kind of, you know, grindcore speed. So we've got, this is Blood and the Jesu with an H. And there's a little bit of a hook riff here. But, like, even without that, this just has, you wouldn't even need it. Like, this just has drone to it. A powerful single tone. And it's kind of pulsed in this rhythmic way that you can never get out of metal guitars. Listen to, like, the circular shape of the drone. You can hear it sort of, you can hear it going, yeah, that's all I can say. You can hear the circular pulse shape to it. The song goes, and it plays against the rigidity of the blasting in a cool way for this kind of unique rhythmic effect that you could not get out of any kind of guitar playing against this.
All right, let's do it. This is really designed like avant-garde electronic music. Much more than metal.
Yeah, I think that's key. If you really want to hybridize them, you have to figure out how to sort of, even if you use guitars, you have to figure out how to escape the riff and start shaping the attention-grabbing parts or quote-unquote melodic parts of the music differently. And here it's just this, you could hear that just cycling, whoa, 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 under it. Like, that's almost the catchiest part. There was a bit of I don't think I misheard the thing. I think I was saying right, is that major key thing on your song sounds totally different, played in a different set of, played through speakers. But, But there was a little bit of a kind of dungeon synthy Dorian scale melody there that crept in. But basically, yeah, the hook in that track just comes from the fact that the wub sounds good.
It definitely does. Well, I think...
And we were talking while it was going how fun it would be to see this live.
Oh, it'd be so cool, man. Like, even if it's literally him just playing it on an iPod and smoking a cigarette and staring into the audience, it would still be the best show of the year.
Oh, yeah, no, I would, we would go off at this show, right? It's just like... Yeah.
Well, I think it's very interesting, the idea that, so this is like...
This is shake up a beer and spray it all over the room music.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's very interesting, the idea of what if we do music that is electronic music structurally, but we're overlaying the timbral and tonal character of very extreme black or death metal over it. I don't think anyone's really tried to do that before. I mean, you've had your metal meets electronic mashup music before, but this is really playing to the strength of the hybrid. He knows what elements of each to use to create compelling music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he has, that's a connection back to Gabestok, is you're combining elements and you understand them all. And also, I mean, that's a common thread, I guess, all of tonight, right? Because Kekht Arakh is also like that.
Yeah. No, I think, honestly, I'm just hearing, I mean, probably from the first note of this, you were like, oh yeah, this is the death metal guys thing. This is just
for sure.
The kind of thing that I love. Everything descended from the Von and Demoncy and Profanatica school is candy to me. I guess the only thing I hope is that, a guy like Ray, like a lot of noise guys, they have a tendency to, they have a project, they have this idea, this very concrete aesthetic ideal in their mind, and they crank out a bunch of releases real quick, and then they're kind of sated and it's done. I hope that doesn't happen with this, because, 25 minutes of this on a full length should be on Iron Bonehead. You know what I mean?
That's true. Iron Bonehead would put it out, too, and it would be a good fit for something like that. Yeah, I think you could easily see that, and I like the short song concept, but in that case you need a lot more of them.
Yeah.
And you could imagine this format being used for a 5-minute song if you wanted.
I think, though, I really like the idea of, every one of these minute-and-a-half long songs is a micro idea.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I get that. But then you just got to make 30 of them.
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
Did you just hoist your cat up to the top of the fridge?
Yes, I did. All right. Look,
that's
she
adorable.
She jumps from the counter to the top of the fridge, but sometimes if there's a new object on the counter, she thinks that invalidates her jump. So she'll just sit there for no shit 5 minutes, gesturing like she's about to jump, but then she will not. And she'll try to jump, and then she will not. So I just cut out the middleman. I just placed her on top of the fridge, her ultimate destination.
Fridging the cat.
Yeah, I was fridging my cat. And then if she's feeling particularly antisocial, there's a little cabinet over the fridge, and sometimes she'll paw her way into that and hide.
Oh, that's great. That's a good lair.
And she's feeling that antisocial a lot of the time. So she's not the friendliest of my cats, but she's my big ornery lady. So that's all right. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we should talk about metal, right? Okay, so now we've got Incarceration with Empiricism. So these guys have done a full-length before, and this is a little 4-track, like 20-minute EP they've done following it up. I've never heard of these guys before. This was a completely random find, and I think I'm just impressed by how complete this music sounds. These are guys who clearly listen to a ton of different music. Within extreme metal as well as outside of it. They're listening to a ton of hardcore and crust as well. And I think it's interesting just how well they've synthesized all these different influences into something that feels fully realized. Like, you can't see the graft lines between genres like you can in a lot of other bands here.
I think that's true. It's sort of, it's sort of like, what it is like a lot of blasting and power chords and some more leady trem parts, but somehow it doesn't really sound like it's in any genre. I think you're right. It's sort of, the press release says that they're going for this kind of like, deep early Sweden thing, right? Like Nihilist or whatever. Mm-hmm. I can kind of hear that, but there's not like a lot of D beats or whatever, right? It's
it's much more modern sounding in general,
and it's just very blasty. You get some blasts and some breakdowns, right? But it is yes, it sounds very modern at the same time, but it also sounds maybe like it's drawing, insofar as it doesn't sound like any of the genres as they've emerged. It sounds maybe like it's drawing on a pre-92 idea of extreme metal.
A more primordial idea of it.
And a thing I wanted to ask you about is, right, so these guys are originally from Brazil. Some of the reviews, like on the Voices from the Dark Side site, somebody connects it to Cogumelo, sort of Black Death thrash. Is this, you know that scene way better than me. This doesn't immediately sound like Sarcophago to me. Is there some relationship?
Not really. I think that's a stretch.
You think it's just, that's just somebody being like, oh, they're from Brazil. Like,
they're from Brazil, and they're kind of black and kind of thrash and kind of everything. Cogumelo is defined by that sort of primordial genre mix before everything was all fixed. So, in terms of that, I guess you could say it gestures towards that, but I think that it's just guys listening to a lot of stuff who are very accomplished musicians and songwriters sitting down with more of a blank slate than usual in front of them. And
that makes sense. As the idea of a blank slate, just like, okay, what are we going to do?
Just very organically, well, what do we like? We like blast beats, we like fast riffs, and we also like breakdowns, and we like cool rhythmic variations and stuff. So let's just do something that incorporates all those things. And for the fast riffs, some of them are more black metal, some of them are more death, some are more thrash, but they're all at the service of the same idea. So you don't get that really sort of badly meshed hybrid vibe you get from a lot of bands. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, well, let's listen to it. So this is off a track called Psychic Totality, and usually this sample's interesting because usually I don't like stuff with kind of protracted intros, but this one's executed really well, and then when the drop happens and they really kick into the first verse of the song, so to speak, it really is like a roller coaster finally reaching the apex of the hill and going down. So
cool.
So I gotta say, these guys have an impressive skill of executing types of riffs that I usually don't like in ways that I really do. Like, the last couple riffs on that sample there are stuff that I usually dislike. Like the sort of entombed style riff is usually something I can do without, and the sort of like needling mid-90s prog death like da 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 thing is something I would usually dislike, but there's something about the way they structure these things and the way they pace them out that makes it really land for me.
I really like that riffing at the beginning, which was kind of really like death metal riffing with sort of squiggly, very low-end single-string trem happening on very dissonant intervals, but it all was blurring together so that if you were listening to it casually, it sounded like they were playing one note, and then at the very end of the phrase, sort of going up towards the octave or whatever.
It's kind of like
there was actually this kind of like rumbling, grooving, kind of death thrashing rhythm going over the blast beats at the bottom, and that really, even if you can't hear the detail because you're not listening on headphones or whatever, that actually just affects the shape of the noise.
Well, I can't believe I didn't think about this when I first heard this, but what this reminds me a lot of, at least in places before the really rhythmic breaks start taking over, is Vader.
That makes sense. It's like, yeah, it's death thrash, but with tons of blast beats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's definitely, it's got Vader. It's even like a little like Chrysian when it's in the really blasting moments.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, for our listeners, we did a patrons only bonus episode on Vader and Chrysian. But you're right. So this is tapped in. That's why this doesn't sound like anything, is that it's tapped into this style of death metal that is both very deathy and very thrashy and very blasty, and that has been forgotten.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this, it's interesting because people, I get what they're saying when they say, oh, nihilist, old school Swedish death metal, stuff like that. Okay, I get it to a degree, especially when it's combined with this deliberately early 90s sounding production. But what I think this really reaches back to, in a large part, is like cool, forgotten 2000s stuff. Like, cool, forgotten, like, big death metal bands. Like, back when Nuclear Blast and Century Media still put out stuff that was worth listening to. Like we were saying, like Vader, like Chrysian, like, any of these kind of bands that are still huge but kind of forgotten. I think they're just presenting some of those ideas in a more underground fashion.
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, big death metal.
Yeah, bring back big death metal. Like, we can do that still. Why the fuck not?
Yeah, for the big death. All right. So this is my sample. This is from Beneath the Chains of Existence. And I like all the fast stuff that happens here. There's some good kind of speed metal-y stuff, and then they pull into a more kind of Swedish kind of melody, like the big, scary, dissonant trem part. But it's what happens after that that really grabs me here. So,
all right.
Gonna fire the only guy.
Yeah, they're pretty good at fast, but yeah, man, that breakdown, that was something. That was a work of art.
That was deeply ignorant.
That was extraordinarily ignorant and yet filled with detail.
Oh yeah, no, it's got a great. That is the kind of riff that does deserve to be played like 12 times, like they did or something.
Yeah, and there are versions of that. There are so many things that are so close to that riff that are so much worse. It's actually, and there's like, they've taken some of the... It sounds way more like a hardcore breakdown than you'd expect in that context. The note choice could obviously be in a slower part of a war metal song or whatever, but they just play it in a lot of ways like a hardcore band. They just sit on the chug, and metal bands for the most part are still ashamed of the chug, which is one of the major weaknesses of metal bands in general. And so yes, learning to love the chug, that is good. Just the cymbals there too over the chug. It just really is like hardcore.
Well, that's something I was curious about.
But then the cadence at the end of the phrase, right? It's a very specifically metal thing, but it's something you can use to make something sound really dumb in a really good way. That and you've got the drums filling in under that in this like thunderous toms way that connects it back to this big death metal sound, right? And a hardcore band wouldn't do that. And then you also get that really great solo. But what were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was just interested in kind of bouncing something off you because you wrote in the notes that you feel like this is a band that very much like plays like a hardcore band or something to that effect, which I find interesting because in a sense, yeah, I get where you're coming from, but I would say this is more purely heavy metal with, capital letters than a lot of bands in this vein are today. Like, so I was just interested because I feel like these are absolutely just metalheads who happen to like some beatdown. But do you think they're really coming from more of a hardcore background as well?
I looked it up on Metal Archives, which is the only info I can find, and these guys seem to have been exclusively in metal bands before this. So they're not like, there's no sort of like scene crossover as far as I know. I may have felt that about this more strongly yesterday. And I think I'm sort of biased by the vocals. That is, I'm not crazy about those vocals in this context. They they're a little too high and a little too expressive. Like it sounds like an individual person expressing his feelings, and sort of like struggling. And that stuff's all proper to hardcore. Like hardcore should convey a feeling of sort of, individual struggling against odds or sort of like cathartic venting or whatever, right? But like in black or death metal, I think it's supposed to just sound like things happening inexorably in this impersonal way.
I gotcha.
You're not struggling against this insurmountable obstacle. You are the insurmountable obstacle, right?
I think I just associate the vocals with like kind of like what I would think of as like crust vocals. Because I've heard a lot of crust bands with that similar, like, strained inflection.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, not my favorite, like, more modern kind of crusty bands that I'm not so into. But, like, But, well, I mean, again, if I heard it in a hardcore context, I'd probably be fine with it. I wouldn't even think twice about it, right? I would just be like, okay, this is how it sounds, right? So I think it's just something about the context. It's an unusual vocal to hear in this context. Maybe that's a distinctive thing about the band and they shouldn't change it. Maybe I'm the problem here, right? But like to me it sounds it relates to the vocal themes also, which seem to have to do with this sort of struggle of the individual consciousness and stuff. I think those kind of go together, and those all seem to me to be sort of extrinsic to metal or extreme metal, to black or death metal. But like, that could just be me, and it could be that my reaction to that influenced how I received the rest of it. It seems to me at times like they are structured more like hardcore songs. But it's kind of an or the kind of way of assembling all these different extreme metal ingredients sounds more like a hardcore band hearing them and assembling them. But I don't think they are. I don't think culturally that's where they're coming from. So it's... I don't know. This is an unusual band, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what... I think these guys could be really big. I think they've got a very intuitive sense of writing to them. It's very natural, very organic feeling, but it's also extremely balanced. And it has an appreciation of just cool, big moments that maybe...
Definitely has that.
Yeah, other bands might overthink those a little bit if they're, like, particularly sophisticated musicians, but these guys don't. They're like, oh, I like blast beat and I like breakdown. Let's find the cool riffs that go between those things.
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
All right, and we are back, nearing the end of our Sunday Night Death March. About to get our work week off to a high energy start with Obsolete's Animate, Isolate out on Unspeakable Acts, which is a pretty consistently good / interesting thrash-centered sub-label of Dark Descent. Unspeakable Acts did that drag car record we reviewed last year, right? So kind of idiosyncratic extreme thrash, and this is certainly that. I don't know what I was expecting when I chose this for the show. Basically, just I briefly opened the promo. I said, "Ooh, Unspeakable Acts, good." Clicked on a track and I heard a cool squiggly riff and I said, okay, this is on the schedule. And I think I was expecting just a somewhat modernized version of like Destruction or something, kind of like, you know, like aggressive speed metal, death metal or something. Maybe a techie version of that, but this is definitely not very... I think the Unspeakable Act thing makes you think it has some relation more to 80s stuff. This clearly influenced by that, but this really doesn't sound very 80s. It sounds very 2021. And it is very technical and deliberately inorganic and sophisticated. So, how would you describe this?
I mean, I would pretty much call it a tech death record. I think it's from a wing of tech death that neither you or I listen to a whole lot. But I would say it's a wing that centers around like the foundational ideas like late death, like Human On, especially Sound of Perseverance. And then there's been a lot of modern bands that have kind of played with that idea and, you know, galvanized it in a way by upping the tempo, upping the, you know, the density of the notes. But I would associate this with... This is a faster, more ripping version of stuff like Skeptic or Illogicist, both of which were bands that were, like, very cool among, like, tech death guys who wore glasses in the late 2000s. And then nobody thinks about those bands anymore at all, even though they were pretty good for what they were. But I think this really connects to something we were talking about last year when we covered the last Sickening Horror record. The idea that what if the real continuation of thrash isn't in retro thrash bands, but it's really in tech death. It's like the inevitable conclusion of thrash. Specifically, this wing of tech death, where it is... I mean, if you get down to it, there's not really death metal parts on this. It's just really,
I don't think there's a single death metal riff or vocal.
No, not really. It's just thrash taken to its logical conclusion as very, very technical kind of rhythm music played at high speeds.
And the other thing to it, it's like it's very atmospheric in some ways. The melodies have this kind of gothic quality to them, sort of like detail, I guess, for lack of a better word, sort of detailed minor scale stuff. They often, of course, they emphasize weird intervals and throw in some dissonant stuff and whatever, but it's highly melodic, just very sped up. There's more textural moments than I was expecting, and at times it reminds me of stuff like, the mood seems to me like, we have the concept of cool wizard music. Mm-hmm. The mood seems to me like kind of very cool cyborg music, kind of in the way that like that band Mamoon you really loved from last year.
Oh, the Contrastic record. Mamoon.
Oh yeah, sorry, the band Contrastic with the record Mamoon with this sort of like futuristic run up the wall Battle Angel Alita kind of vibe. And Gridlink, right? This record reminds me of Gridlink more than death metal.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, more than death metal, yeah. But I would say that the thing that's missing, the thing that like Contrastic and Gridlink have in common that this band doesn't is Contrastic and Gridlink are both super emotional. In both an emo way and in a more general way. This is sort of specifically void of emotion. This is very mechanically futuristic music. This is not music about people at all.
I get that, but I think there's kind of like it's definitely. I guess what I'm getting is the atmosphere and the kind of like it's not an entirely it's not an unattractive future. I mean, there's something appealing. The cover it has all these blossoms on it. There's something kind of I don't know. I think it might have something to do with kinds of experience in a more abstract way. You get like
it's like a vaporwave album cover.
Yeah, it's true. A song title I really like from this is Silent Freeway. Like these are like spaces and weird kind of sort of uncanny or powerful spaces that are just kind of out there in the American ruin, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but let's give it a shot. Let's see what you mean. I get what you mean, that it's not like emotional in the way those are, for sure. But there's no like tenderness here.
Yeah. There's no sentiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's start with Still. That's just the beginning of the record. This is their this one has these sort of impressive calling card riffs, and it has some of the more techie side of the record. So let's just go. Squiggly riff go.
It is a cool riff.
Isn't it? Yeah. I mean, Yeah, some cool riffs in there. So one thing that I'll lead with I think just a thing that will probably immediately strike a lot of people about this, and that I think is maybe I think I quite like this record, but I think a thing that maybe could be tuned up on a future release is I think the vocals are too loud.
That's very interesting that you say that, because for me, listening to this music, the vocals kind of blow right past me. Like, I have to, like, consciously pay attention to remember that they're there. Like, it's not a bad performance by any means, it's just there's so much flash going on in the guitars, it's like I don't think about them.
I think I kind of agree. I think I just mean that, like, literally they are very loud in the mix, and they're literally, like, popped in front of the guitars. But what you're paying attention to is the guitars. I like the tone on these vocals. They're nice. They could be death metal, but they have this kind of pukey black thrash quality to them. And in a lot of places, they're more like a kind of rasp. And I get that the idea is, okay, you have this kind of intricate riffing that has almost this delicate, thin quality to it. You have the music itself is kind of refined, so you need kind of hoarse vocal. You need, like, horses in the animal, right? You need the vocalist to be a horse. You need sort of you need to get the aggression and virility in some ways from the vocals.
You need a very specific vocal style, because the thing is, you can't play too much with the tone, because it needs to have rhythmic impact to stand up to everything else that's so compressed and rhythmic as well.
Yes, and it needs to leave room for the vocals for the guitars. You don't want cutting through the guitars. So, like, that's an interesting problem, but it's like, I think this band has the right idea, as in we need the vocals to be really abrasive, but they're a little out in front, and I feel like the strength of this music is kind of like, it's weird, although it's tons of riffs everywhere, it is weirdly atmospheric, at least for me.
I can see that. I mean, describing it as atmospheric, at first I didn't really understand what you meant in the notes, but I mean, there is definitely a sort of atmosphere you get from this. It's just very different from how we perceive quote-unquote atmospheric music in extreme metal, which is, you know, mostly based on how much reverb and delay you put on shit.
Yeah.
You know, that's how you know it's atmospheric, man, because the echo goes on for like 20 seconds. No, I get that. I definitely get this sort of, like, I keep going back to the word galvanized, because I bet these guys listen to a lot of, like, Voivod and Vector as well.
Oh, that's gotta be a big thing. Yeah, for sure.
I bet that's a big
is
thing.
one of those bands that's relevant to a bunch of things that I like that I've never really been able to get into, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, same for me. And I think that another big touchstone for these guys, which I think is almost like the dirty secret of a lot of tech death bands, is the Faceless.
I have heard the name, but who they?
They were described as deathcore. You know, their first record is kind of deathcore-y, but really they became a pretty straightforward tech death band. You know, extremely modern. But the big thing was, their whole thing was, you know, very kind of spacey, atmospheric, but still, like, you know, arena-sized riffs. You know, lots of songs about planets and shit.
So is it kind of like, they were ahead of the planets curve. So is it kind of like where we get the halftime breakdown there, and the riffs are the sort of, and the riff is going sort of like filling in all the space, like. Oh,
definitely, yeah. That's something that the Faceless would do. You know,
that makes sense. Sort of like, grooving, like actually kind of like pit riff grooving cyber breakdown.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, the Faceless were always extremely nimble, and I think that's the same word you would use to describe the guitar technique here.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's a band that's like, you know, they're like a huge band.
Maybe I should listen to the Faceless.
It's not bad. I mean, those first, you know, 2, maybe 3 albums are pretty good, and then, you know, they just kind of ended up repeating themselves after that. But they, you know, they were seized on by a lot of people for a reason, and then they led to bands that didn't have the, you know, the stink of deathcore on them, like a band like Obscura or something that got into, let's do fucking spacey tech death stuff. And I think I just think there's a whole lineage there that's been sort of like pushed to the back because it's a little embarrassing that it was like the Faceless that really kicked it off. But I think that's what we're hearing on a lot of this sort of music.
Interesting. Yeah, all right. So let's go to your sample.
Okay, so this is where my first sample I'm going to be a little bit more critical. So the structuring of this music it tends to be based off of like, there's a few main melodic ideas on every song, and then a lot of what you're hearing is variations on these. It's not like, you listen to a regular old school death metal song, it'll be, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 1A, 3, that sort of thing. Here it's more like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 2A, 2B, 2C, 1E, 1F, that sort of thing. You're doing a lot of these kind of vamping over the same general chord structure and, just kind of playing around with different intervals and exploring all the corners of the space. I enjoy that. I think that's a cool idea. My issue is that this album, and it's the same way I feel about a lot of tech death stuff, there's a lot of passages that I really enjoy, but I don't know if there's a song I could point out to as like an exceptional one. It becomes a little difficult for these things to hang together as complete compositions. So let's listen to Old Horizon, and maybe you'll hear what I'm talking about, where it's like, ooh, okay, how are we going to really pace this out? So I guess I would say that, okay, so all the songs on this record are based off of one or two primary musical ideas. And this one, it's clearly that like rhythmic burst of the opening riff, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is kind of
although that is not the main riff. Insofar as there's a main riff, it's like the third one that hits just before the vocals come in. Yeah, no, it's not, but that rhythmic figure is the central part of the song, and everything kind of revolves around plays on that rhythmic figure. And, there's a basic kind of melody, but the melody varies a lot more. And it's like, so you've got all these variations on this one rhythmic figure and these sort of melodic variations of each other. And then you've got these small breaks to kind of create space and redirect the music. And all of it sounds good. I think it's very cool sounding. I showed this to some buddies of mine yesterday, and they were really into it because I know they're primed for kind of like proggy and techie death metal. I guess my issue, though, is that
I feel like for metal, I'm really looking for kind of a narrative songwriting structure. And in a lot of cases, the songs on this record tend to end in a very similar place to where they began. So as a result, there's passages, there's riffs, there's moments that I really like off this, but again, I'm kind of at a loss for like, what's the song? You know, what's the whole thing that I think is a really compelling experience from beginning to end?
Huh. Well, I think that's a place where your death metal ears actually are you're operating on a more structurally sophisticated level than me, which is I like the riff. But it's I think I see what you mean. I mean, you could describe it. So one way, yeah, it has to do with this sort of motif. I like motivic. I like you. Well, you know, I like really repetitive stuff, right? So like the motivic composition kind of thing makes sense to me, and I kind of get. To me, it seems like each of these songs kind of revolve around distinct kind of events, and as you said, yeah, maybe that like motif, and for others of them, there's just like certain cool things that happen in them that set them apart. But apart from one another, I get what you mean. They're not narrative. There isn't an idea of development per se. I think I agree. I think it's just like, I listen to hardcore, you know? Like, there's not, like, development on, like, a Discharge song, right? It just kind of happens. And in some sense, you could explain it both in the sense that there's, I think, from your angle, you're right, that there is this sort of musician guy interest in playing around with little, sound figures, right?
Yeah. This is musician guy music, 100%.
For sure. On the other hand, it's also very conservatively structured. That is one reason this is on Unspeakable Acts, is I feel like if you think of the lack of development in terms of them actually kind of being structured like thrash songs or long hardcore songs, I think it makes more sense. Like, a lot of these songs do just go, even though they're doing this sort of fancy play with themes, they do just run through, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, here's the different thing that happens, 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the songs structurally, I mean, I didn't sample it for whatever reason, but Silent Freeway and a few others really are just structured like thrash songs. Like, they bring it in with just a ripping 1, 2, and that drives it, and there are some variations on it, and then it ends. But it could be that, like, and I appreciate that because I like that it keeps it anchored in this sort of more primitive form that's less prone to the risk of wank. But given that the band is working on such a sophisticated level instrumentally, maybe what we're both picking up on is they could write sophisticated narrative 5-minute songs, right? That's the other thing. Almost all these songs are under 5 minutes.
No, I do appreciate that there's not a lot of, like, prog indulgence on this, even though it's, like, obviously it's technically beyond basically anything that we cover on this show regularly. But,
yeah.
But I guess the distinction that I would draw is when it comes to, like, development of a song, the missing ingredient is, like, in a hardcore song where it basically just loops back on itself, that has, like, an immediacy and a heaviness and an abrasion to it, where this is, like, very clean, very precise music. So it's already, like, at a handicap with me, you know, because I listen to heavy metal for fucking heavy, brutal shit, you know. Which is, that's a me problem, that's not a this album problem, but maybe that helps to kind of distinguish why I feel the way I do about it.
There's probably also more novelty to it for me, since I don't know music like this at all, right?
Fair enough. This is very long hair, yeah.
Yeah, this is I think a rare, this is like, certain things about this make it so that it's accessible to me, and therefore I find it interesting and cool. But yeah, as far as things like this, what do I like? I like that first, the Australian band.
Psychroptic?
Yeah, I like the first Psychroptic record a lot. Shit like that, right? That's just kind of like this kind of thrashy, mechanoid, fancy riff music. Like, I do get that, right? But,
fancy riff music. I like that.
Yeah,
right.
but like, anyway, moving on.
Well, yeah. Let me back this up with like positive stuff. So, stumbling and listless. You see, here's an example of this band, I think, sounding a lot more promising than on the previous song. So, what you're going to hear is a lot of the same motivic writing, but this music on this track is a little less compressed. There's more room to breathe, and I think that's really advantageous to them. I think that a lot of what these guys do is sort of deliberately restricted writing, where it's like, we're going to do fucking really note-dense, really technical shit for 3-minute bursts, and those are the songs. Here, they open up a little bit more, not tremendously, but enough to give themselves the space to develop themes in a way that feels more metal in the way that I like it. More narrative, more... Oh, go ahead.
No, just, yeah, cool. Real quick before you jump in, I think, like, just to sort of try to see where you were coming from before, one way you could phrase what you were saying, or one way, like, that might make sense, is what you were saying about, like, well, like, a hardcore song is just bludgeoning, right? Yeah, that's a very fair point. These guys are calling attention to form as such, right? They're making you listen to, like, the notes as the spaces between the tones in abstract space, and they're drawing your attention to this, like, network of rhythms and things like that. They're really making you think about structure. And so, I appreciate that they're working within these restraints, but it might make sense then to have the structure of the song itself also be something where the action is happening.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a really good example of that.
Okay,
so let's
excellent.
just listen to the opening of this track.
Whoa. I immediately hear what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these guys, basically what they're doing here is they're sacrificing 10% of the note density to gain, like, 100% more space to move and to create real development and to, like, because, like, you know, that whole extended intro sequence, about 1.5 minutes long, that's wonderful. You know, you've got all the sort of, like, micro variations that these guys are into, but it also just expands further. It feels like a real prelude to something occurring when the vocals kick in. You know, a lot of this music tends to, not just this band, a lot of this style of tech death in general tends to have this sort of like binary on-off nature to it.
The whatever horror, what was it?
Sickening horror.
Sickening horror. The sickening horror had that kind of quality to it. It's like
it's like you're going or the song's over. You know? Yes. Mm-hmm. But them just paring back just slightly on some of the most extreme rhythmic stuff really opens up the spectrum of possibilities, and I think that it's a trade that's worth making for just how much more interesting this band is in a mode like this to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is there's like a, in terms of just like the through experience, there's like a quantum leap between that and the previous songs. Like that is, so I mean, there was a lot there that was cool to me. One thing, this allows me, I said that there's going to be a lot of name drops on this show, like the tonight's. The other thing is, like, in terms of the non-thrash influences on here, I feel like more than death metal proper is Swedish melodic Black Death. Like, the entire melodic sensibility of the album, but especially on tracks like this more expansive, more triple time feel, it's like Dissection.
I can see that. Yeah.
And the vocals, too. When he comes in, the harsh vocals, like, when he really goes for it on the vocals here, he sounds excellent. And that's one of the sort of grimmest moments on the record. And a lot of the rasp is a very John Nutfight. So that's kind of an interesting, unexpected thing in the mix here. And the fact that they're using these kind of gothic, neoclassical melodic structures with this kind of cold mechanoid tone and more sort of skronk stuff kind of helps give it this very unusual, surreal atmosphere.
Well, it's also, I mean, you can kind of associate the melodies with a lot of different things, because one thing that I thought on that passage is there's parts of it that sound very Mediterranean. You know, like that huge arcing, like piercing lead riff, that dun, 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 you know, that was some like old Italian lute music right there. I really like that.
I get what you mean. Yeah, definitely got the lute quality. That sort of especially really opened up in the middle. You just had that extraordinarily long melody. Is that what you're talking about? Like, yeah. The rhythm guitar just started a riff and it continued for like all 48 bars or whatever. And the bass was going underneath. Like lots of cool bass counterpoint there. Yeah, I agree. On that big riff, they were playing like, those are kinds of melodies that if you were if you're playing like vampiric French stuff, kinds of melodies you think you'd be trying to write. But these guys just, they're like, here's 15 of them in a row, and it's all one riff, right? That's pretty cool. And that's why I say it's like clearly these guys have the ability to create these like more narrative kind of structures, and for me, at least on this record, it's night and day when they're in either mode. And the narrative one is just like that blows the doors open with all sorts of potential to do awesome stuff. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, that moment when the vocals kick is just so exciting after that. So here's an example of some other cool shit. So here you get some of the more straight-ahead thrash stuff, and you also get another unique thing about this album that I'd like to hear them develop more, which is that they're very good at these kind of sound object moments. That are part of the more atmospheric quality of this. So let's just go Callousness of the Soul, again, from the beginning. And the fact that we pull all these samples from the beginning speaks to the structural conservatism of the record, right? It's like... Yeah. But like... Callousness of the Soul, let's go.
You see, I would say that is another example of the band operating much more narratively. Maybe it's like a front half of the record versus back half thing.
I agree. Like, I was hearing, like, okay, this works like the last one. Yeah. That's
interesting.
So
I wonder if it's like two songwriting blocks, basically. The front half was kind of maybe written earlier by the band, and then there's a break, and then, something like that.
That makes sense. Like, let's hit them with at the beginning, we'll keep people's attention by we just hit them with the big riffs, right? The straight-up songs with the big riffs that we wrote at the beginning, and then we go, like, you basically keep attention at the beginning just by being impressive, and then, like, just impressive and cool, and then you open it up. Yeah, hopefully they keep going towards this direction, right?
Yeah, no, I think the idea of doing weird, sort of lushly atmospheric, but still hyper-aggressive tech death is a very cool idea.
Yeah,
and it's not really... Yeah, it doesn't really have an immediate comparison.
Yeah, this is sick. I mean, the thrash riff, if you put different distortion on that, you would just be, wiping a lot of the black thrash stuff. You'd be not... What's the phrase? I don't know. You'd be wiping the floor with them. Right? It's just, you could stick your tongue out and squiggle it around while playing that riff, right? That fucking riffs. And then when you think it's going to lay into the vocals, and, traditionally, I don't know, you'd get some double bass pedal or blast or whatever, the song just falls apart. And the vocals come in, and you just get this sort of like cascading, slow trem melody, and the other guitar is moving in a completely different direction. And I think when I listened to it casually before, I thought they were just doing weird textural chordy stuff. But no, those are riffs, melodies. It's a thing that a black metal band would do just by hitting weird chords there, right?
Yeah. But these guys are doing it deliberately,
Yeah, and and like there's a complicated rhythmic idea happening there. Yeah, it feels like there's this big chasm opening up, and yet there's like tons of shit happening. And then the way it goes, you get this kind of, just the builds are really cool. You get this sort of cascading kind of types of melodies that you'd get in sort of metalized screamo, metalized emo, which is a specific vibe that what I'm talking. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. It's kind of like, and then the way it just starts escalating at the end, you get this like very big melody, but it's just outlined in these little arpeggios. Like, I can't hum it, right? It's one of those things you can't hum. Very cool. And it reminds me, this song in particular reminds me a lot of Serpent Column.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, how so?
Well, a number of people in different ways have pointed out that a lot of Serpent Column sounds very thrashy. That's one of those things that, there's this suppressed kind of, or this unspoken kind of angel corpse, arrogant black thrash thing throughout it is part of it. But, like, it often in the total effect, it sounds kind of like this. Like, you get these sort of more aggro thrash riffing, but also the sound object things, like on Katotos, right? Just these moments where it just completely collapses and he just starts banging on the guitar, right? Or you'll just get this one note that will just be this beautiful immersive thing, like strum, for like 30 seconds, and then the song kicks in again. Also, that sort of like the kind of emo flourishes, the kind of climbing, open, arpeggiated stuff. I don't know if it's who knows if these guys even listen to Serpent Column, but it's because you can get to the same place from all their own mesh of influences. But it's pretty interesting. Also, think about like on Invicta, right? Invicta and Katotos sound like that. They have all these big open spaces, they have these thrashy parts, and they have this kind of glistening guitar tone.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see the comparison now.
But yeah, do we have anything profound to say about this on the outro? I find myself strongly in favor of this band, but I definitely agree that the stuff on the back end is... Yeah, you were completely right about that. The stuff on the back is lit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I basically like this, but yeah, it's like you said, you know, the back half is where this record really takes off, and I hope they stick with that. I mean, you can still do, you know, but you can do it with heart.